Welcome back to Alyssa's Movie Takes. So today I'm going to be looking at Season 2, Episode 5 of The Chosen. And I'm going to let you know that this is going to be a hard one for me. So I'm going to split this into two parts. The first part I'm going to talk about the episode. And then the second part I'm going to talk about Jesus' reaction to Mary's trauma and how I don't know if they quite got it right. And I do believe that it might affect the character of Jesus and violate what he might actually have done and why it makes a difference, okay? So let's start off with the episode with some good news. This was the most thrilling episode that I've seen. They are building these characters. You have this spy following Jesus company now, trying to figure things out. We don't know much about him except that he's a Roman. Simon the Zealot is joining the group. In the midst of that, there's a demoniac who shows up at the camp who tries to basically attack Mary, and Simon the Zealot comes in to first try to save her with force. And then Jesus comes in to save her more with the power of his hand. I will say it's kind of funny. It looks a little bit like a Jedi move, the way they have Jesus cast out this demon. So this is clearly a 2-episode storyline. We get our first real cliffhanger here. And wow, was that an ending. We also get to see Jesus and John the Baptist, who are cousins and who probably grew up together, interacting for... Here's a little bit of a spoiler from the Bible, probably the first and last time. And what they end up discussing together by a lake is the difference between the two cousins. Jesus, who's a little bit more subtle in his approach to confronting the sin that he sees in the world. John the Baptist, who just goes for it and completely always just ends up in prison or in trouble. But that was the calling on his life. You see that there's a kinship between these two. You have the understanding that both of these men have a deeper understanding of what's about to happen than anyone else because they've lived it. And they've grown up knowing that they were set apart, that they both have miraculous birth stories and they share that in common. And then they also know that they were born into the world for the coming of the Messiah, Jesus as the Messiah and John the Baptist to prepare the way. It is a beautiful and moving scene. I also, before I get into part 2 of this, to shout out to Liz Tabish, whose performance of someone going through PTSD is award-worthy. Liz, you nailed it. I hope that if you went through any hardship doing these scenes, that you're fine. I know that Dallas is very aware to take care of you guys as you guys are shooting, but well done. Now, I'm going to put that into a box and go into my second part and talk about more in depth about Mary's trauma and Jesus' reaction to it. To couch this, I want to tell you why I'm passionate about this and that I'm not making this to make an angry internet. I want to just explain why I think it's important that we get the character of Jesus right in a traumatic situation. My own story is that, like Mary, I am a sexual assault survivor. And if I knew anything during that time of my trauma, which was about 2 years, 1 year where I didn't really know what was happening, what was the cause of my difference, that I had somewhat of an emotional concussion where decisions that I used to make that were easy were no longer easy, they were hard. I was afraid to drive, I was afraid to get on public transportation, and then about a year into it, I realized that why I was different was because of the sexual assault. And so what happened for the next year was I was in a safe enough place to essentially break all the way, and then God put the pieces back together. And if I know anything, it's that in every moment, Jesus was present, Jesus was attentive to me, and Jesus was the one who knew truly how to handle my trauma more than anyone else. Isaiah 9:6 talks about Jesus, the Messiah, prophesies about him being a wonderful counselor. Truly, Jesus is a wonderful counselor. He is in there in the moment with you. So when I take issue with how they write this scene, it's coming at it from a survivor's perspective, okay? So I do take issue with how they address Jesus' response to Mary's trauma. Mary is clearly not okay after the demoniac shows up. She was already not okay because she's having flashbacks because of the Roman soldier. It was a Roman soldier who originally assaulted her, which was a big part of the reason that she ended up in prostitution in the first place. That it was that traumatic assault that started it. She's had bad interactions with Romans her entire life. And seeing a Roman and then another one put her in a position where she's having a panic attack. She's trying to muddle her way through it throughout the day, and then this demoniac shows up, triggering another part of her life of the time that she was possessed. So she's double traumatized. And what Jesus does is he doesn't address the group that's just seen this thing that they haven't seen before, a casting out of a demon. Mary was delivered from demons, but the disciples haven't seen it. He doesn't focus his attention on Liz. He focuses his attention on Simon, who's the most okay out of all of them. He was the one who seemed prepared to take on somebody who was possessed. I know in that moment that Jesus would have at least given some attention to Mary, made sure she was okay before he went off with Simon to talk about what he's calling Simon to do. Simon the Zealot. The second thing is, when Mary goes missing, there is not a chance in the world that Jesus would have not dropped everything and gone to find her with Simon Peter, and Matthew. He would have not prioritized sermon prep over going to look for the lost sheep. And it's important that we get this right, because if God is not there for you in that moment of trauma, or that moment when you're reliving trauma, then that's character affecting. The character of Jesus would have gone after the lost sheep. He would have been attentive to Mary. I want to show this to you through my story. So there's fuller versions of my story, and actually it's God's timing. I just had my anniversary of my attack this last week on May 18th. And as part of that, I wanted to share the story of God's goodness before, during, through, and out of trauma, and show the lessons that are there for other women who've experienced this or something similar, or people who are experiencing PTSD. God is present in every moment. He shows up strong. He is stable in the midst of my chaos because he sees the end of the storm. I know that this is a 2-part episode, that there's another one coming, and they might be able to redeem it somewhat, but there's really no excuse for Jesus not going after Mary when she was lost. And as I said, I think that's character affecting. So it's taking the character of Jesus, who is focused on people in pain, who would focus on the person who was in most need at that moment, and that was Mary. And they might have an explanation. Maybe they're trying to teach Simon and Matthew a lesson. But for me, it was written poorly. And I want to trust you guys, because I have all the way along, and I'm trying not to make this like pointing my finger. I just know that it's important to get the character of Jesus in a traumatic situation right. I also want to address real quick how Jesus might have also addressed the group after the demoniac release, because how many of us have been in ministry and seen something kind of cool or confusing that God was doing in a moment, and then the most important part of that particular ministry time was the debrief. That debrief is a very important thing in ministry. And because the disciples had never seen anything like this, like with the demoniac before, and clearly they were all feeling a little scared because he went after them, that Jesus might have debriefed with them some, and it would have been great to see how he explained what he had just did. John the baptizer was excited because he got to see a miracle, but the rest of the disciples were pretty freaked out. I'm guessing probably some of the audience was freaked out. It's not something we see every day, except maybe in the movies, but it's there in scripture that Jesus was driving out demons. But what does that really look like? It kind of looks intimidating. And I think that Jesus would have had a little church after church to explain what had just happened and how they didn't need to be afraid. I know part of the reason why they did it is because they want to set up that Mary's in danger so that they can have their cliffhanger. And I get that if you haven't experienced trauma and you haven't experienced Jesus' character in trauma, that you might be a little bit more willing to say Jesus was willing to send other people. But from my experience, I know that he was right there in it. So my podcast version of my story is about 20 minutes. The one that I released on Tuesdays, just over an hour. I would encourage you not to watch it or listen to it at work, since I cry my way through the podcast when I'm telling it. All right, it's intense. It's hopeful, but it's intense. And then the video version can stir up some trauma with the point of releasing it. But if you are looking for why I'm passionate about this, those stories are the reason. And I still love the show, and I felt it was important to address in the midst of a fantastic episode that's exciting and thrilling, and I love it. But I do think it's important to get that right, because I was thinking about it last night. I slept on it. I woke up to it this morning again, and I thought, yeah, no, Jesus would have been right there with her in that moment of trauma, in that moment of reliving trauma, because that's the Jesus that I know. That's my take on season 2, episode 5. Thank you for listening to my take on this hard issue. I do have trust and faith in the writers. I'm just speaking from a survivor's perspective and from something I'm passionate about, to see Jesus show up to people in their trauma. Thanks for listening, guys, and God bless.